Well, hello, greetings and salutations. If you guys can hear me, give me do the number 7 if you can hear me. Can you guys hear me? Yep. Am I coming in? Okay, good. Sound coming in loud and clear. Thank you. It was this kind of a delay there. So I wasn't sure if I was actually getting through or not. Well, I just want to say that after a very tumultuous 30 days for me and really kind of a rough 2 years, but um, the last 30 days have been really kind of this culmination point of a lot of things. But with all the things that have transpired with Ella and her accident, the hospitalization, and now her recovery, it's just been really amazing to see what God can do when so many people are praying and um, really just the outpouring has been overwhelming. And to say that we received thousands of cards and gifts and things is probably an understatement. I mean, we're still getting them. They're still showing up. I mean, today we got something from Adelaide, Australia. We've gotten cards and letters and stuff from North Ireland, from Germany, England, all over Canada, all over the U.S. It's been pretty amazing, and Ella's been pretty overwhelmed with all of the well wishing to her, and she's she's trying to wrap her mind around this whole thing. So, anyways, it's been a really just an amazing blessing to have had this happen. I mean, what could have been a terrible tragedy, God has turned and used that for something very good and to His glory. So we thank Him first and foremost for all of His blessings, and um, certainly there are people out there that are struggling with all manner of needs and going through all manner of trials and tribulations, and we just continue to lift them up and pray for them. And maybe many of you in the audience too are struggling with certain things. Just ask that God would be with you, and let's in fact let's pray before we begin. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the opportunity we have to come before you today as a body of believers. We thank you for this ability to fellowship, and for many, this may be the only fellowship they get throughout the week. And Lord, I pray that you would use this time, use me as just a vessel or a tool to speak through to share the things that you've put on my heart. And I just ask that I would be faithful in the telling. And Lord, I just pray for everybody out here in the audience. I pray for each individual person watching or that will come to watch this later on. Lord, I know that there are many out there struggling with whether emotional or health issues, or there's family relationship issues, or there's financial issues, or whatever the case is. Lord, I pray that you would be with them and that you would see them through and that you would receive the glory in all of this because we know you can work. Um, you're the miracle worker. You're the one that can do the things that seem impossible to human minds, but for you, it's easy. And Lord, I just pray that if anybody here doesn't know you, we pray that through this, that you might, um, that the Holy Spirit might draw them to the saving knowledge of the faith, and from there, that spark would be lit, and that they would take that fire and run with it, Lord, and that just like you did to me many years ago, just pray that you would raise up a bunch of believing watchmen and women out there that are cognizant of the times in which we live and are doing their best to to warn a lost and dying world that this is all about to come to an end, Lord. And we just thank you again for the time that you've given us today and the means that we have. And I just pray that it would be you would bless it and it would be to your glory. And it's in your holy name we pray. Amen. All right. So I want to thank the moderators first because I always forget at the end. So I'm going to thank the moderators now because I bad habit. But so thank you guys for doing what you do and for um, helping me out in all this, and not just my channel, but Tyler's and Chooch's and Watchman River and Lee and everybody else that is on here that is trying to counteract all of the garbage that's on YouTube. We're on here trying to spread the message that the Lord's coming back soon. So I'm thankful for the platform that we have, YouTube, Rumble, and other things that we can get messages out on. I don't want to seem like I take this for granted. I know that this platform may come to an end, or my time on it may come to an end um, due to censorship or some other means. But um, I'm grateful for you guys to be on here with me. And couple of admin notes. I don't want to make Monday my exclusive live stream day. I'm going to be somewhat flexible in this going forward. So Monday, Tuesdays, or Fridays will generally be about the days that I should be trying to live stream. I'll try and do one at least once a week, and I'm limiting myself to just doing one interview a week. And then, I'm not gonna, I'm probably not for the time being, for at least the next year or so, go to any conferences or anything like that. Anything that takes me out of state or away from the family. So um, I'm going to finish my short stories that I'm writing and then get back to writing Hobo 3. And that's really kind of the extent of my writing. Articles, maybe, 2 or 3 a month. They just take a lot of time to do. So anyways, that's kind of where I'm at personally, and I'm trying to balance all that out with the family and making sure that I give them equal time and good, not just equal time, but quality time. And I think that's it for my. Um, I am looking into starting a local Bible study here. I know there's been a few people that have come. Tyler's been there, Jan, Jeray, some other folks that are in the Dallas area, Fort Worth area. The place I'm looking at, and I'm really hopeful, praying that we can get it. It's much closer than the other location was, and once I get the thumbs up on that, if I get the thumbs up on that, I'll certainly publish that information for anybody that wants to attend. Um, we'll be doing that like one Saturday a month or something. So we'll try and get that out there. All right. So today, I wanted to publish the article this morning on uh, choke points, choke points, hotspots, and tripwires. And I wanted just to kind of go through that and talk through that for a little bit, and then if there's any questions at the end, I will certainly go to that. And Brandy just asked, "Can I give an update on Ella?" But yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to talk her into coming on here. She's very self conscious about her hair and having to wear the brace and all that. Um, but she is doing very well. She gets her staples out of her head on the 20th, and then she'll continue to have to do physical therapy for the next, I want to say, 16 weeks or so. But she'll certainly have some follow-up stuff with the neuro team here at Cooks, and just to continue to follow up with everything that's her recovery and all that. So just children in general are incredibly resilient, and it's, if that had happened to me, I'd be laid out for months and months on end. But she has a very the challenge with Ella is going to be slowing her down because she still want to go 100%, and she can't, so we got to get her to kind of take it easy and just ease back into her old schedule. And there'll be some things she won't be able to do going forward. I mean, there's just any kind of contact sports, anything really aggressive like that, or even roller coasters and all that sort of stuff. She's not going to really be able to do that stuff anymore. So there's going to be some changes to her life from that regard. But um, you and I mean, I'm 50 now, and I just had my birthday on the 27th, and I if the doc told me I could never ride a roller coaster again, I'd be like, all right, whatever, like no skin off my teeth. I would just be okay, or no contact sports or whatever. I'd be like, okay. But for a young kid like that that loves to get out there and mix it up and play, it's hard. That's sobering news for 11-year-old. But uh, yeah, the funny thing is, I don't feel 50. I mean, I don't feel like I'm 50. It's weird even hearing me say that. But um, the only time I really feel like I'm 50 is when I wake up in the morning. Like just getting out of bed and everything hurts. You hadn't done anything all night. So all right. So the article that I had this on my mind for a while, just kind of doing like an update on where we are in the world, and it would be, I was thinking about this through the lens of Bible prophecy and just scripture in general, but for me, it would be incredibly difficult, almost impossible, really, to dispute the fact that we're in the birth pangs and have been really for the last 124 years now, since about the turn of the 20th century. And I know there are varying eschatologies out there like preterism and others that I don't even know how they deal with the conditions in the world today as we go through it and not realize things are coming to a head. You know, Jesus, the birth pain process, as Jesus mentioned in the Olivet Discourse, and as the Apostle Paul, wrote in his epistles, he likened the lead up to the very end as birth pangs. And if you've ever had kids or you're familiar with the process of the pregnancy and the trimesters and all that, the last trimester becomes very precarious. And then at the very end, it is incredibly uncomfortable. Uh, and that's where you start to see the actual process of where the baby's ready to come out and that whole process. So but from the year 1900 forward, I mean, we've had 2 world wars. Think about this. We've had 2 long wars, which are, the Cold War was 40 plus years, and then the war on terror now is 20 plus years. We've had this exponential technological advancements, exponential advancements that carried us from the first industrial revolution all the way through the fourth industrial revolution where we are now. And all of this happening in such a condensed time. um, you know there's nothing like it in human history. We've had basically the collapse of the monarchical empires. Now there's still some monarchies out there, but for the most part they are nowhere, they're a shadow of their former selves. um, you think about the phrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Obviously it sat on the British Empire, and it sat on the Spanish Empire, and it sat on the Egyptians and the Romans and the Sumerians and everybody else that's ever made a claim similar to that, the Persians. Um, Empires rise and fall, and so we're living in this time where we're seeing great transition away from the way things used to be for thousands of years until World War II, and then we see this radical change in the global structure where nation states are emerging left and right, and many of these nation states are hobbled together, mixing different ethnic groups that had been at odds with each other for hundreds, even thousands of years. And now we're starting to see the fruits of all of that come to play. We've had the rebirth of the nation of Israel, who had been in diaspora for nearly 2,000 years. We've had a population boom now where we started out at the beginning of in the year 1900, I think we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 billion people. Now we're at 8 billion people. It's unprecedented. I mean, we'll use this example a lot, but in 1903, you had the Wright brothers who performed the first successfully manned flight. Um, and you go fast forward to 66 years, and you've got people going into space, humans in space. And I know that the whole moon landing and all that's controversial nowadays, but like we can't deny the fact that we're putting men in vehicles and sending them into space, and that all happened within a span of 66 years. So things have moved along exponentially, and um, we've crossed many. You can call them points of no return, or Rubicons, or red lines, Pandora's box, or whatever. These are things that have moved the needle, and things will never go back the way they used to be. Here's an example, like when after the Manhattan Project, and they were able to have the first successful detonation of an atomic bomb. That was one of those Rubicon moments where things will never be the same after that, and they weren't. You know, when the two fellows, and I can't remember their names, discovered how to look at the DNA strands, beginning the whole movement of the genetics movement going forward up until the 90s when CRISPR was developed. Again, um, once that line was crossed, we can't go back to the way things were. Quantum computing, I know that the theory of quantum physics goes back to Einstein and even before Einstein, but Schrodinger's cat and all that. But the fact that we can now create quantum computers that function under those principles, I think that began in the late 90s, early 2000s. Again, that's going to fundamentally change how we process information, or encrypt information, or how we manipulate information. That will forever change everything. Artificial intelligence, 10 years ago, this was more of a fringe idea, science fiction, Hollywood kind of thing, and now it's everywhere. Chat GPT and all the other stuff. So um it's it's going to become more pervasive as time goes forward. The last thing here is the manipulation of man-made diseases. We recently went through something very similar, but the fact that we have governments and private industry out there creating these things that have the potential to wipe out mankind is certainly something that has to be contended with. And again, that changes everything going forward. But that you think about it, as crazy as all of that has been, we are now coming to kind of the crescendo of that here this year, year of our Lord 2024. And we've seen all these different flavors of movements and political uprisings and wars and conflicts and all these different things that have happened. We can kind of boil it down into like three categories. Mhm. And the first category is, um, I guess, in the broadest sense, you have Western civilization versus Eastern civilization. These are two different worldviews that really kind of came out of the Cold War era. When you had two superpowers, you had the United States and you had the USSR, the Soviet Union, and then we had all of those nations and those proxy nations around us that look to us to be the arbiters of justice and the rule of law in the world, right? And then by the 90s, that collapsed into one superpower being the United States. But for the most part, American dominance in the terms of culture, and America didn't conquer the world militarily, but it did conquer the world economically and financially and culturally. And you could look at the 1980s and see that American influence was felt everywhere. There wasn't a country you could go to on the planet that didn't sell Coca-Cola, or didn't have some kind of McDonald's, or didn't have American movies playing there, or American music or whatever. It was everywhere. It was very pervasive. I always kind of liken this to Pax Romana, instead of Pax Romana, Pax Americana, where this um, Americanism was felt everywhere. Well, the second grouping you have here in the last, say, 50 years is the rise of not the rise, but the reemergence of like a theocratic rule versus secularism. And if you look at nations like Iran, who, is they're not a huge country and they're not a large country by population, but their influence is felt everywhere, throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe. They influence a lot of things because they finance a lot of things, and they finance a lot of destabilizing elements within nations and countries, to fit their agenda. That same thing with Islam. Islam. I'm talking about the Sunni Wahhabi version coming out of Saudi Arabia. Think about all of the influence that they've had over the last 50 years, say going back to the 70s, and how much that has impacted the world. And if they had their druthers, they would make the whole world Muslim. That's their end state. So then you have other nations pushing back against that, pushing secularism, and you see this great push and pull with those two things right there. And then the last grouping, which I say is really more of a more recent movement, um, I'd say in America probably started around the time of 2008, 2009, kind of up until today, is nationalism versus populism, or excuse me, nationalism or populism versus globalism. And you have these different views of how the world should run. And a lot of nations out there think they don't want to be part of this globalist system. They just want their own country back to the way it used to be. The United States has got a huge movement here with that, and you've got countries in Europe, who just recently, the last few weeks, had these huge elections where they um, sent a very loud message, by sending populist and nationalist politicians into the EU Parliament, and by huge majorities. So there was a shift in Europe as to the direction that they are going to go. And on one hand, you have the globalist. These are organizations that are really top heavy. The World Economic Forum, Trilateral Commission, the United Nations, Bilderbergers, all the different, in the Rockefeller Foundation, Clinton Foundations, all the different foundations out there, that are pushing these ideas of how to unify the world under one system. But the way that they're trying to do this is incredibly unpopular because once it's tried out, and it sounds good in theory, but once it's put out in reality, it's incredibly unpopular because uh, they don't work. The things don't work. Their initiatives don't work, um, and they refuse to deal in the world of reality where people are, you know, given all things equal, people are selfish, and we will certainly look after our own self-interest over the other, the welfare of others any day of the week and twice on Sunday, let alone, other people around the world, or the next generation, or, people way down the line. Um, so people are the big problem in a lot of these utopian um, plans that they have. They're just not based in reality. So, um, excuse me. So, a lot of things are working and not working, and we seem to be in this very tumultuous time where I'd say probably the most common, the most popular sentiment everywhere is this feeling of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. Even within our own country, I would say that this year would be incredibly consequential, probably perhaps the most consequential since since at least 1860. And we know how that turned out. All that to say, I feel like the world is also looking at us and looking at excuse me. Looking at our politics and trying to scratching their head trying to figure out what it is that what direction is America going to go afterwards. Anyways, all I can say is that I find it very interesting that all of these things are happening, especially like culminating the way they are in this what Tyler and I dubbed as the Final Four. And and if somebody wants to link that video, they can to the chat. But basically, the 4 years from 2023 to 2026, and it seems to be lining up in a general sense with the time frame uh, of the year is as a thousand years is as a day is as 1,000 years principle we see in the Bible, in Second Peter 3 and in Psalm 90, um, and also tying that in with Hosea 6, 5 and 6, that there would be about 2 days, and then God would turn His attention back to the nation of Israel. And so we seem to be at this transition point between the Gentile dominated kingdoms of the world. Now Israel's becoming center stage again, and certainly since October 7th, that has truly been the case in every kind of way and shape possible. Where you've seen this huge outpouring in support of Israel initially, that quickly flipped, and now it's this huge backlash against Israel. And you've got politicians, organizations, corporations, political movements, students, everybody's out there trying to get Israel to back off and to bend the knee to the world sentiment, and they won't. And I don't blame them, but it's certainly Israel's become center stage again in a huge way. But all that to say is that we're at this incredibly consequential year, and I think things are coming to a head. And regardless of who wins the election this year or how that turns out, things are never going to be the same. They're not going to be the same. Now, the reason I thought of this article and the title that I did, I wanted to kind of go through the terms choke points, tripwires, and hotspots, and they all have kind of distinct meanings, and they each have significance in how things have played out. Now, I'm going to start from the kind of the broad sense here with choke points, and these are the a kind of a definition for this is straits or canals through which significant volumes of international trade and military movements must pass. The strategic importance of these things is that they these choke points can grant a country significant influence over global trade and military logistics. Um, and if you can go to the article now or pull up my website, you'll see the map I have there. There's a number of different these choke points from around the world, and they're all becoming incredibly contentious. And people, the enemies of freedom or the enemies of Western civilization, if you want to call it that, have taken advantage of this and are seeking to cut these things off as to um, cripple the West economically. Because the Houthis in Yemen don't care, like that it costs these shipping companies, millions of dollars a day. They don't. They're not the recipients of any of these things, so they don't care. It doesn't impact them. They're gonna. they're going to use that to their advantage. But it's not just there; it's a lot of different places as well. But they're coming incredibly consequential going forward. And I think it's interesting from a biblical standpoint and this is just my opinion, but before the flood, I believe the world was one giant landmass. And you read there in Genesis chapter 1, and I don't have the exact verse in front of me, but it says all the waters were gathered to one place. And to me, if the waters are gathered to one place, then the land must be gathered to one place. And so I think during the actual flood event itself in Noah's time, some 1600, almost 1700 years later, it was while the world was submerged in water that the land masses broke apart, and then we get the current the structure of the world that we have today. And these are strategic. These are things God put in place. The straits of the Strait of Gibraltar, and basically, is that choke point between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean. All of these, the Bering Strait, all of these are significant in their how they're going to come to play out here in the last days. Okay, tripwires. These are generally defense mechanisms or deployments designed to trigger a larger response if they are set off, if they're breached or attacked or whatever. And an example would be NATO deployments in Europe are designed. Troop deployments are designed that if they get attacked by, say, the Russians, then of course there's going to be a response, which is why they've been so hesitant thus far to put any boots on the ground in Ukraine, because it would require retaliation. It's a tripwire. We have U.S. servicemen and women in Taiwan. They are tripwires. Um, Same thing with North Korea. The 38th parallel there separating North and South Korea. So there's a lot of these things that they're designed to trigger a larger response. And the thing is, we don't just have these things. The enemy has these things as well. And I would say like the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, whoever, they have their own versions of tripwires and things that they will act upon if or react to if they're set off. And then the last thing is these hotspots. Obviously, these are these ongoing or potential conflict areas where if they were to go hot in terms of an active conflict, they could have significant geopolitical strategic ramifications for an area. And I've listed a lot of these things out in the article itself, but it's just you could see Taiwan, for example, would be one of these areas that if it's potentially a conflict area now because mainland China wants to repatriate Taiwan back to the mainland. And if they do this militarily or they cross some red line, that is going to trigger a huge response from the United States and from the U.S. allies in the region, to include the Philippines, Australia, Japan, South Korea, um, anybody else in that part of the world that is not interested in Chinese domination will certainly join with us in that. So that takes kind of this constant monitoring and takes constant resource allocation to keep track of and to stay on top of, because the potential for those things to go sideways very quickly can happen in just a blink of an eye. I mean, look at October 7th. This attack by Hamas on the Israeli communities there on the border of Gaza. That I'm sure there are people that knew something was going to happen. I'm not trying to ascribe blame or anything to anybody. I'm just saying I woke up that morning getting my phone blasted saying, "Hey, Israel's under attack." and then it just kind of went from there, and that's how fast news can change. So one of the things that have come out of um, the World War II time period, once we detonated the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One of the kind of what's the word? Unexpected consequences of that was in the development of atomic weapons. I mean, we basically created the most terrifying weapons in history. It What it did was, as a secondary, it prevented a World War III. In the traditional sense of war, right? It prevented that from happening, and what because nobody wanted to trigger a nuclear war because nobody would win that. And nobody wins that kind of war. Everybody loses. And so these superpowers, the East and the West, now have had to find ways to fight each other without actually going to war. And so we have this new subset of warfare that's developed called gray zone operations. And basically, these are government sanctioned, and whether they're done overtly or covertly, they're done through spy agencies, intelligence agencies, specialized departments within the Department of Defense, like special op groups and things, Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Special Forces, Rangers, whoever. Yeah. And they're carried out clandestinely for the most part. But they include a lot of different things. They include economic sanctions, boycotts, cyber attacks, all forms of espionage, training up or oppositional support. So if these special forces goes into a country and they train up the rebel groups there to fight or wage some kind of a coup d'état against the government or a revolution. Um, we have that, and then you have information warfare, and then any other means of non-conventional warfare is being conducted. But basically, gray zone operations falls just below the threshold of a hot war or a declared war or conflict. So that's the kind of delineation for that. And then the last kind of status that we have in the world is a declared war. So certainly we could look at today Russia moving into Ukraine as being one of those more conventional type of conflicts where it's nation on nation. And but leading up to that, let's look back at the last 10 years prior to 2021, was gray zone operations all throughout Ukraine, and really going back to 2014, leading up to the color revolutions there. Most Westerners had no idea who was fighting who in Ukraine. It was incredibly complicated. You had no idea because nobody was wearing uniforms. Nobody was identifying themselves as soldiers. It was all kind of civilian clothing, carried out attacks. Everybody kind of looked the same. They all sounded the same, and so unless you were from Ukraine or from Russia, you would have no idea who was fighting who. So let me let my dog out real quick. Hey. All right, am I still coming through okay? Volume wise, sound, audio? Okay, good. All right, so let's go through these. These are the strategic choke points, and I've got on here listed. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 or 11. You've got the Bering Strait, which for most of the last 200, 300 years seemed completely irrelevant to everything, but we've discovered that there's huge mineral resources in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And Russia is very much looking to seize control of all of that. The US and Canada presumably want to prevent them from dominating this northern, the northernmost point of the Earth for a lot of reasons, but um, the Russians seem very intent on doing this. And so, since their nation borders, I would say, a significant portion of the Arctic Circle, they're stopping them is going to be incredibly difficult. But the Bering Strait is in one of those locations that is going to become increasingly strategic, and one in which the U.S. would like to close off to the Russians. I don't know if that's feasible to do that. I don't think it is, but it definitely will become contentious in the years to come if we're here, right? If we're still here. Um, the Taiwan Strait, obviously, this is contentious simply because of who Taiwan is and who China is. Um, but we've seen that there's approximately about 50% of the world's containers fleet pass through there annually, and controlling that is going to be paramount to one of two outcomes: either things stay the way they are with Taiwan and China, mainland China being separate, or they're being reunited. So the Suez Canal, obviously, is the Egyptian waterway connecting Europe to Asia. You get it in 2019, they had about 19,000 vessels pass through it, and that's about a billion tons of cargo went through. Um, there is still more expansions being done there, but the big problem isn't necessarily the Suez Canal. It's not the Egyptians necessarily. It's the the Houthis down in Yemen. So at the Bab el Mandeb Strait, um, connects the Mediterranean via the Suez Canal to the Indian Ocean. Um, Huge prior to all of this stuff with the Houthis, there was a huge piracy problem off the coast of Somalia, to which the United States addressed militarily back in the mid 90s. Because basically Somalia is a failed state. It's just a breeding ground for all various factions and other nefarious groups out there, you know, basically living off of piracy. And I love the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, but obviously I know that that's highly romanticized. It's not anything like real life piracy. Uh, Piracy is definitely hugely detrimental to the commercial markets of the world and to the cost of living and all this other stuff. Um, but we have the Panama Canal, which separates the Pacific from the Atlantic Ocean. It saves, on average, a ship 8,000 miles, nautical miles, from having to travel all around the southern tip of South America. Um, again, 2019, you had about 252 million long tons of goods, which equals about 2.6 billion in toll revenue for Panama. Incredibly strategic location. I know in the name of democracy, not only us, but say the British have relinquished control of certain straits back to the countries that they're located in. I just think that if they were ever to flip the governments in those places to where they're incredibly hostile to Western powers, or to the United States in particular, that would definitely trigger military responses from the United States. In fact, oh, I'm thinking of Noriega, but I think Noriega was in. I think Noriega was either in Panama or was in Nicaragua. I can't remember which of the two. But again, I mentioned the Bab el Mandeb Strait, which is right off the coast there between Yemen and Somalia and Eritrea. Um, Obviously, highly contentious, and we already have military. We have a base there now, and um, blanking on the country. Thought I had it off the tip of my tongue, and now I can't remember what it's called. Starts with a D. Um, Give me a second. Let me pull up a map here. Djibouti. Djibouti is the name of the country where we have military forces in now. But um, not just us, the Chinese are there, the other European countries are there. There's a lot of military there in Djibouti because of uh, because of how strategic that waterway is. The Strait of Malacca, um, which is there in kind of Indonesia, and that has a ton of shipping that goes through there annually. And again, high piracy. You've got a lot of Muslim. Indonesia's by population is the largest Muslim nation in the world, but there's a lot of piracy there because there's a lot of poverty, and poverty will drive people to do incredibly desperate things. Strait of Hormuz, which links the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and drain that drains into the Arabian Sea there. Um, that gets a ton of oil because most of, if I'm not mistaken, most of Saudi Arabia's oil is on their eastern side, closest to Iran. So a lot of the oil manufacturing companies and their pipelines and the shipping and the ports are all kind of on that side, directly across from Iran, who would just as soon take over that whole area than let the Saudis stay there and make money. So again, another incredibly contentious time or place to be, very narrow, and one that the Iranian Navy has taken advantage of in terms of using their fast boats to go up to other vessels, even to U.S. Navy and to British vessels, and basically take them hostage. If you remember back 10, 15 years ago, there was a British ship that got taken, and then there was an American vessel that got taken as well. I think it was during Obama's time period. We have the Strait of Gibraltar that connects the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, and you get 90,000 vessels through there. It's incredibly strategic in terms of who controls access to the Mediterranean. And I think this is going to be one of those areas when you think about the book of Revelation, and John is seeing this beast rising out of the sea. We know um, what he's speaking of is the sea of humanity, the sea of the Gentile nations out there. But he's on Patmos looking out at the Mediterranean Sea. So to them, that was the Great Sea. I mean, that was a huge ocean to them. Um, and so I think that the symbolism there of the beast rising out of the sea is he's thinking the Mediterranean, but in general, it's the Gentile nations that's coming out. But the Danish Straits, and I mentioned this on my article, World War III from Impossible to Inevitable. There is a island in there that if because Russia has I'm trying to think of the name of that place. Let me see. Kaliningrad, and there's an island there called Gotland, and if in Kaliningrad is a Russian enclave on the southern side of Lithuania, and it's just military there. But I would think the first thing that they grab if there is a further expansion into Europe, or kind of a conflict between NATO and the U and Russia, that would be one of those areas that they take over first because they can control all the shipping from there that goes in and out of the Baltic Sea. So they're even more so than the Danish Straits necessarily. But you get about 70 to 80,000 vessels that travel through that area every year. And then the last one here is the Turkish Straits. So the Turkish Straits separates the Black Sea from the Mediterranean, and it is through the Strait of, I believe it's called Bosphorus. And while the Turks were pro-US or pro-West, it was great that they had control of that because obviously that's an ally to us, and it's strategic. But now that they've turned away from us and turned toward Russia and to China, and vehemently become anti-Israel, um, I think that this is going to be a significant point of contention as well. but I think it may be one that is solved at the conclusion of the Gog and Magog conflict. Give me 1 second, folks. Hello? Yeah, yeah. Shut the door on your way out. Sorry, that was the hospital calling for the anesthesia department calling for my wife. But say hi. Hi. Somebody says hi, Titus. You read over my toes. I did. Sorry. All right. Next thing we have is tripwires, and these are the geopolitical tripwires are specific conditions, events, or situations that, if triggered, can lead to significant and rapid escalation of conflict or tension between states and regions. So, as I mentioned earlier, they're kind of you can set these as defense mechanisms or deployments of soldiers or troops or equipment or systems, radar systems, things like that, that are if crossed or violated or attacked or whatever, they then become a significant point of contention. Obviously, China's, here's a tripwire with China, um, the development of these little artificial islands in the Pacific there in the South China Sea that are significant. Um, these are ones that have caused a great deal of contention because they're trying to expand out their maritime zone, economic zone, influence zone, and they want to kind of keep expanding out the Chinese borders um, by creating these artificial islands. And then they, obviously do this aggressive patrolling and enforcement of their territorial claims. You have North Korea's missile tests. These are the launch of these ballistic missiles, particularly as we've witnessed them escalating their capabilities. They can go higher, they can go farther, they can um, uh, certainly at this point reach the U.S. mainland if push came to shove. Um, Not only that, but the nuclearization of North Korea was a huge point of contention back in the early 2000s. Russia's activities, obviously in Ukraine, and whether they choose to expand that further into, say, Moldova or um, from Belarus into other places. We don't really know, but that's one of those things we have to keep an eye on. What? Nobody knows. Then you have Iran's nuclear programs. Uh, their advancements in uranium enrichment has been one of those things that have kept leaders up in Israel for the last 15 years, and certainly been one that they've been heavily invested upon. That for them, that was the most significant threat. And I think kind of in part why they let their guard down with regard to Hamas. Hamas seemed like these like two-bit amateurs, even compared to Hezbollah in Lebanon. But they certainly let their guard down in those regards. But now that Hezbollah is ratcheting things up with Israel, um, there's certainly a point of conflict that is frightening to a lot of the Israeli leadership with regards to just how we think about all the tunnels and stuff that have been built in Gaza. Well, I mean, the ones in Lebanon are way longer, deeper. They're way more reinforced. They're built into the sides of mountains and things. They're going to be far more difficult to displace than the ones in Gaza. Um, Taiwan Strait tensions. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about that already. I think that my honest opinion is that Xi Jinping is going to make a move on Taiwan based on the outcome of this election. He may make it either before the elections or after, but I think he's 80 years old. He's certainly going to want to do this before he dies. He wants to see China and Taiwan reconnected. Oh, so uh, the in and out of the dogs drives me nuts. And then I have these like little ducks everywhere. Hey, dude, shut that door. Um, India, Pakistan. You have skirmishes along the line of control in Kashmir. Again, another contentious hotspot between India and China. Um, there's been numerous skirmishes that have happened between the Indian army and the Chinese army, and it doesn't take much for me to see these two countries go into war at some point. You've got basically the number one and number two most populous nations in the world. India now is the most populous, and then China is right behind it. They're competing economically. China's basically aligned itself with Russia, and India is kind of in the sphere of America influence, but they're also kind of tied in with both Russia and China with BRICS. So I don't know what direction they're going to go, but they have competing interests in terms of the influence in the Indian Ocean. Who has the most ports? You've got ports that are owned almost entirely by the Chinese, and you have ports that are now owned almost entirely by the Indians. But we'll see how this all plays out. And then Indian, or not Indian, but you have Turkish, Afghani conflicts now. Not Turkish, Pakistani and Afghani conflicts now, with the government now being handed back over to the Taliban. You got to remember that the Durant line, the line that separated Afghanistan from Pakistan, is completely artificial. It's something that they don't recognize at all. So for them, you could go back and forth to either country, and they do all year long. During the winter, they go to one side, and then um, the summer and the warmer months they come back over to Afghanistan, and it's just there's no border. It's just kind of free flow back and forth. But there are a lot of conflicting agendas and power grabs over in that part of the country because in that part of the world because it's so tribal. And the area that connects Pakistan and Afghanistan is called Waziristan, and you have north, central, and south, and so you've got these different tribes that exert different kind of levels of control. The different tribes that are in power. There's a lot of different ethnic groups that live there. Probably like 20 different ethnic groups in Afghanistan, as well as Pakistan. So with all that going on, it's very tumultuous, and so Pakistan is a nuclear powered country, and they have nuclear weapons, and so maintaining stability in Pakistan is tantamount to preventing another like North Korea from popping up in right there in Central Asia. It would be incredibly dangerous for the world for that to happen. Um, Obviously, Turkey's actions in the Mediterranean. We know that they've become since Tayyip Erdogan took over. Um, he's incredibly anti-Semitic. He's anti-Israel. Very much is an Islamist. Yeah. And wants to regain or bring back the glory and the power of the Ottoman Empire. And the scary thing there is that we have nukes there that we have there with our military bases and our Air Force base there in Insulik, and it's been there longer than it's been in the United States. So they're thinking, well, technically it's ours. It's been here longer, So depending on how this could be incredibly dicey. Should Turkey continue its march to the east and march away from the West into the arms of Russia and China, into the arms of this Gog Magog coalition. Certainly has a lot of downsides to that. And then you have obviously Saudi Arabia and Iran. You have the center of Shia Islam in Iran, and you have the center of Sunni Islam in Saudi Arabia. And as we found out in the last couple months, Iran sending this gigantic missile barrage and drone barrage against Israel was incredibly ineffective. And I think they know that they're even if they hadn't given anybody forewarning, they would have probably not succeeded in much of anything. However, um, Saudi Arabia is a much more enticing target for them to take over. Like I said, in the Persian Gulf, they're spitting distance from Saudi Arabia, and especially eastern Saudi Arabia, to where all their oil producing and refining capabilities are in the eastern part of the country. So I could easily see Iran making a move on Saudi Arabia at some point, if things continue to march in that direction towards destabilization rather than the world order kind of normalizing or stabilizing. A couple more here, because I don't want to go through all of these, but uh, one of the ones that doesn't get talked about hardly at all is the GERD dispute with between Egypt and Sudan and Ethiopia. So the Nile River starts at the head of that is in Ethiopia, and they decided to put a dam there to dam the lake that water comes basically turns into the Nile to dam it up to generate power. And this is obviously very troubling to Egypt, right, and to Sudan because the Nile is a huge source of agricultural uh, means and financial means and on all manner of things to those countries that are downstream from the head of the river. So that has the potential to erupt into any number of things. Um, kind of the last thing here is they're kind of connected. One is the Mediterranean migrant crisis. So you have all these migrants that were flowing from Africa in the Middle East into Europe. That has triggered a very much a populist and nationalist response in the European nations as a backlash against this idea of open borders and globalism and all that other stuff. Um, and so I think that this weaponization of migration has a counter effect that not intended that they are going that there could be a swing to the right for Europe. And out of this swing to the right is where this Napoleon-like leader rises up out of that chaos. And I'm talking about the Antichrist after the rapture and the kind of the start of the tribulation and all that. We could see that because one of the things we've noticed, as much as we think the world has gone woke, and certainly from a corporate standpoint it has, and from a Western government standpoint it has, but the average people on the street have rejected it. Now, I'm not saying that they're Christians or that they're Bible-based Christians or anything like that. I'm just saying a lot of the woke stuff is nonsensical. It is not even based in reality. So, um, people have just come to reject it because, hey, if you have a daughter, you don't want her having to share a bathroom with a grown man. If you have a daughter competing in sports, you don't want to have to compete against boys in that. And that's just one thing, but I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things that are just become so nonsensical. And even the left, when you think about the left, they are so disjointed because they're all protesting everything and they end up protesting each other. You have one protest for one thing that gets hijacked by another radical leftist group to protest their thing. So everybody's got their own thing that they are championing, and they're completely at odds with each other, um, and very disorganized. They're just incredibly well funded by a small group of individuals like Soros and Schwab and Gates and all these guys that fund these type of things. But other than that, they have a central point of funding, but they're what they are protesting against and rioting against and all that completely vastly different and at odds with each other. So I don't know that that's the thing that Satan is going to use in the last days. I think he's going to very much bring back something that is incredibly popular. And when we talk about the rise of the Roman Empire, um, we kind of look at it from today's lens, where look at any of these Left Behind movies or anything, and you have the Europe, and you've got the EU Parliament building in Brussels, and you've got the Tower of Babel kind of feel to it, and you've got a Antichrist in a suit and all that, and that may be true to some degree, but you've got a huge number of European youth in the younger generation that are unemployed and they're bored and they're becoming mischievous and they're becoming parts of these leftist groups. It's let me diverge for 1 second. Satan has no use for atheism inside of the 70th week. Zero use for atheists. Zero. He doesn't need atheists. He needs people that are believers and that are 100% committed to following his man and worshiping his man, this Antichrist guy. In the same vein, Satan has no use for all these radical leftists who are all completely uncontrollable and just emotionally driven and are uh, dyeing their hair blue on this side and pink, and they're all they do every day is protest everything. um what he needs are people that are dedicated, smart, and loyal to his cause. And so I don't see wokeism as being the thing that brings the world together. It's so fractious that there's no way it can do that. They're going to rally around a man, and this man is going to come. He's going to rise out of this giant crisis in the world, which is part and parcel why I put this list together. Is just to show how completely um, tumultuous the times that we live in are. And so, out of all of this chaos, and very much like the Hegelian dialectic, there is going to be somebody that rises up after. And I think, and again, my opinion, he is going to popularize the notion of empire, and he's going to popularize the notion of imperialism. And I want to say it was Brandon Holthouse the first person I heard say it, but talking about, instead of there being just a one world order, it's going to be broken up into this imperial regionalism. People are going to reject globalism outright because they know it doesn't work. But I think they'll embrace regionalism. And that regionalism, then the overarching construct governing them is going to be this imperial form of government, which will be a Rome 2.0. And that Roman leader can, if I'm trying to conscript young people to come into my military to serve for me, what sounds better just from a marketing standpoint? Hey, join the Roman Legion, be a centurion, la 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 la. Or hey, join the EU army. You can be a private, or an ombudsman, or whatever the case is. I think they're going to bring all this stuff back. Now, imagine being a centurion with carrying a, uh, an M4 and all the laser scope and all that stuff on top of a sword. He'll have some of the original stuff, but like it's all going to be about marketing, and it'll be very retro, but it'll also be incredibly powerful. And I think that's how this thing is going to play out. Um, and I'm not saying that we're going to go back to wearing togas or anything like that, but I mean they could. I think that there's certainly cause for belief that that could happen, be simply because we're tired. We're tired of the business suit and tie and this that. It's going to be kind of a complete rejection of the way things have been for the last 120, 130 years. Yeah. Okay, let me go on to the last point. Flashpoints. Flashpoints are these hotspots that are refer to these geopolitical regions or issues where conflicts have the potential to escalate quickly, often involving significant military, political, or economic interest. And these are critical due to their strategic location, resources, or political significance, and they have the power to draw in the attention of multiple global players. So, although all three of these things kind of overlap each other, there are the differences that I've listed out. Again, like choke points are not anything man-made. They're just the way the world is, right? The geographical locations of things. Where it becomes strategic is how we humans, in the form of governments, decide to manipulate control over those areas or not. If we want to maintain freedom of access for everybody, that's one direction. Or we want to tightly control that access and you have to pay me to go through it. That's another way to look at it. So tripwires, again, that's the defense mechanisms or the deployment of certain assets to places, people or assets that would trigger a response. And then here, the last point, these flashpoints are these places that have been plagued with centuries, even millennia of conflict due to ethnic or religious differences, cultural differences. And they are always kind of contentious in the sense that if they begin to erupt there, it could speak to or even a regional conflict that could be much larger and really involve a lot of major nations. And obviously, we've talked about Taiwan and China, India and China over the Ladakh region, Tibet and China, these freedom movements that are happening inside of Western China, Ukraine, Russia. And I think with this Ukraine, Russia, because we've antagonized Putin into, we've wiped peace off the table. We've not allowed a peace settlement to arise during this time period. We basically kept this war going by funding the Ukrainians. It's becoming increasingly devastating to the Ukraine itself, not just to the people because they've lost a huge number of in their population, but to the land, to the resources, to the cities. I mean, it's getting just really destroyed and devastated there. But if we keep pushing, I mean, Putin could obviously move into Moldova. He could move forces into parts of uh, Poland to take over the Baltic states. Um, I mean, there's any number of ways that this could play out, but certainly this has the potential to expand beyond what I think was originally intended. Ethiopia, you have the Tigray revolution going on, and that's the Tigray people. There's the Omaroi, there's the Hameric or Amharic, and you have the Tigray, who are like the minority population there. Um, they've tried to break away and be their own group for a long time. This goes back to the '70s, but it's kept going, and this conflict it keeps going. And there's, I want to say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90,000 people have died in this conflict so far. Um, Afghanistan and Taliban, the Pakistan conflict there, because Afghanistan is continuing to be this incredibly destabilized state, very much in the same vein as Somalia. Um, Obviously, we have Israel kind of fighting on seven fronts right now between Hezbollah, Hamas, these factions inside of the Judea and Samaria, the Houthis, the Turks, and the Iranians. So they have this a lot of different people that are trying to fight and destabilize Israel, and we obviously know how that will play out. And I think we'll see the culmination of that with at least the first part of the tribulation. That'll culminate with the Gog Magog war, and then North and South Korea, as I mentioned in my article, World War III. I think if things play out as I imagine them to play out, then there will be a chain reaction. There will be a further escalation in Ukraine that may trigger China to do what they do with Taiwan, or vice versa. And then China, Beijing would unleash North Korea onto South Korea. And then you have basically what you have is a splitting of all the forces that were dedicated to one conflict now are being split into many different areas and become less effective. India and Pakistan. So there's a kind of a three-way conflict there between India, Pakistan, and China. all in the kind of the Himalayan region area. And then obviously we have some notable mentions here that I didn't get to in more detail, but Venezuela is very much interested in moving into Guyana, however you say it. Guyana's discovered a huge amount of oil off their coast. Um, and Venezuela feels very much that that should be part of their country. Um, Obviously, we have Mexico in the mix here because basically Mexico has become a lawless state governed by these narco terrorist groups, these cartels that in this last election they elected this lady that I think she's way far left. I don't know her name, but she's very much a leftist, very anti-Israel. But 37 candidates had been assassinated prior to her election. 37, and somehow we think we have a partner with Mexico. We don't. We don't. They are just bought and paid for. And if we don't deal with the cartels, it's going to be increasingly consequential for the southern part of the United States, at least. Um, Pastor Gary says, if the election results here go a certain way, you could have a push for a united Ireland, which would push us to Troubles 2.0, Civil War. Tiny country, but since Brexit uniquely positioned. And I would say also with Ireland in particular, as I mentioned in my World War III article, there's the underwater sea cables that connect the Europe to the United States, and I think off the coast of Ireland would be one of those strategic places where, should the Russians pursue further conflict in Europe, they would absolutely cut those cables, and that would be trillions and trillions of dollars worth of money lost almost instantly, as well as communication issues and all other manner of problems that would happen. Um, Plus, China and Russia have the ability to shoot satellites down and stuff. So, if they want to cripple communications, they can start by cutting that cable off the coast of Ireland. And why Ireland? Because Ireland isn't in NATO, and so there's no NATO agreement to come to Ireland's aid should something like that happen. So, but obviously Mexico is incredibly problematic for the United States. Same with Haiti. Haiti is a just a dumpster fire that's going off the cliff, um, into oblivion. Just what the worst kind of scenario you can think of in terms of collapse and failed government, corrupt government, et cetera, et cetera. Haiti's had a it's probably going to require some U.S. involvement there more than just well wishing and political finger wagging. It may be boots on the ground kind of response to Haiti's destabilization. And they had just recently a couple of missionaries that were killed there. A young couple, I can't remember where they're from, but keep them in prayer, their family in prayer. I mean, they were down there doing God's good work of just sharing the gospel and providing food and resources for the very impoverished there, and they were just taken out and shot and burned. Um, just incredibly sad. It's incredibly sad to see when Satan has his grip on a nation, and I think of a nation like Haiti that has so long been involved in things like voodoo and all of the Santeria and all the other kind of the bastardization of Christianity with um, not Eastern mysticism, but all the tribal religions there that got brought over from Africa. The Lloyds, thank you. Just incredibly dark country, spiritually speaking, in terms of the amount of control there. Same thing with in places like Honduras, where MS-13 rose up, and I think their president there now has done a good job of just throwing everybody in jail. If they have the MS-13 tattoos, they're in jail. You know, and basically, it went from being one of the most dangerous countries in the world to now being one of the most safest. Well, I mean, we could list 20 cities in the United States that are probably just as dangerous. So the United States certainly has its share of problems. Um, Armenia, Azerbaijan, uh, a lot of Christians in Armenia pray for those folks there because there is a great deal of hostilities and conflict going on with that part of the world, and they're connected right there by Iran, or sandwiched in between Iran and Russia. So a lot of conflict there. Actually central to northern Africa. Huge problems there with all these Islamic groups, Boko Haram, ISIS, Al Qaeda, other groups that are basically going around killing Christians. Uh, if in fact, if you look at most of the all the mentions that I have on here, that one of the almost unifying things that they have in common is Islam is part of the mix. And I don't subscribe to the fact that the Antichrist is going to be Islamic. I don't think he will be. um, in fact, I don't think the Antichrist or Satan will have much use for Islam going into the 70th week. I mean, once Gog Magog happens, I think that is going to be the great neutering of Islam, of militant Islam, rather. And so much of that will be the steam will be taken out of militant Islam, and basically what will be left is this blending, bringing together of all these religions. Okay, so that was basically the article for today. I didn't touch on last week's article, gradually then suddenly. That article was 3 times as long as what I published. I had to really cut out a lot of stuff, and I may make the stuff that I cut out into its own separate thing. But ultimately speaking, the United States, we're basically at the end of the cycle, and you see that there's that Scottish historian Alexander Tytler who give the cycle of nations. It goes from bondage to courage, or great spiritual faith, and then to courage, and then from courage to freedom, and then so on. Makes a circle, right? And most of those things, from prosperity to apathy, that can take a generation or two. I mean, that those are over a long period of time. But what happens suddenly is when you go from apathy to bondage, that happens very quickly, just within a matter of a couple of years. So I think we're there. And just to culminate and to summarize that whole article into what I think we are today for the United States, I used to think the United States would look like Rome in 476 AD, when you had the barbarians marching through the gates and everything's on fire and collapse. I don't think it's like that anymore. I think it's Rome 27 BC, right when Rome changes from being a republic to being a an imperial regime under a Caesar. I think that's that transition we're probably more likely looking at. It could be both, on one side of the United States, because it's such a big place. Large parts of the West maybe that is lawless, but then the other parts there may be falling under line with this new mystery Babylon, or whatever you want to call it. This new system that arises, part of the 10 horns. All right. So there's those two things. Let me go to the questions here. Thank you, Sarah, for collecting these. And this is today. Okay. Going with Heather Hughes asked, "Do you believe America is Babylon?" I didn't used to, and I think Tyler's changed my mind on that. Basically, his discussion with this pastor, and I can't remember the pastor's name, but he made a good point to me, about Babylon and the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. It's all Babylon, and it's going through these different phases. And now we're at this ankle. We're at the ankles, right before the spreading of this 10 regions, or 10 um, 10 seats of power for these 10 kings that don't have land yet, but are basically going to be co-opted by the Antichrist. So I think we're part of that, if that makes sense. Gwen Stone asks, question, is Israel backing down because of the cabinet being divided due to Gantz and America not sending aid to Israel? I don't think Gant's departure is really driving that, and I don't even know if American pressure is backing down. I think the last I read, they have about 2 weeks left to finish operations in Rafah, um, and I think that, uh, the West is becoming increasingly frustrated with Hamas because there's nobody the things that they're asking for, they're not even in the realm of possible or reasonable. Um, so you get a guy like, Anthony Blinken, who is making the statement publicly to the media that the things that Hamas is asking for, some of it is doable, but a lot of it's not doable. Showing their frustration that they're not going to be able to negotiate any kind of settlement with the folks in Hamas. They may throw their political backing behind the PLO if they come up with a new leader. I don't know if there's a new leader for the PLO. I don't even know what happened to the old guy, but I don't know. I think they're going to finish operations in Rafah to whatever degree, and whether or not they can get these hostages out of there, I don't know because in the discovery, once they've taken control of the Philadelphia corridor, they've realized that a lot of these tunnels go into Egypt. So the hostages may not even be in Gaza anymore. They may be in Egypt or someplace out in the Sinai somewhere. So it's I don't know if there's going to be any definitive conclusion once they finish operations in Rafah. I think Hamas as a political entity will be done, but there may be something else that rises up there that calls itself a new name, but it's probably Hamas with a different banner or something. Brandy, hey Brandy, ask, is this draft a real possibility? Yes, absolutely it is. And I think women will probably, I don't know if they may add in women in there too to the draft since nobody can define what a woman is anymore. But the draft, 18 to 26-year-old men will be automatically registered to the draft. Is happening one because the armed forces aren't meeting their recruiting requirements, their quotas. Number two, you've got increasingly large segment of that age group in America that the boys, the men, um, aren't physically capable of doing. Um, they're not fit. Either they're not fit or they're disqualified for any number of things. Primarily, you've got a number of states that have legalized drugs. So, I mean, there's going to be a whole lot of things that they're going to take into consideration before recruiting nowadays. But I think the fact that they can't meet their numbers, on top of the fact that we have all of the things I just mentioned going on in the world today, it's incredibly. If you were an army senior leader or a marine or navy or whoever, and the pool that you have to draw from is increasingly going lower and lower and lower, like Lake Mead, right in the summertime. You start to get a little nervous about how am I going to fight all this two front or two theater operations, which Russia would do in Europe. That would require a lot of the army and the air force, and then in the Pacific, China, Taiwan, or North Korea, South Korea, that would require a lot of Navy and Air Force and Marines. Um, and they're not able to meet those numbers. Something has to give. So bringing up this draft is a solution, I guess. However, I don't know how successful that solution will be when you consider the last time we had it, in Vietnam, and we're way more, we're way worse today than even that generation was in terms of homogenous, views on what it is to be an American and all that kind of stuff. So, um, will the Mark asks, will we be going through a new jab season? You know, I kind of think we will with the bird flu if and when this thing comes out. I think that will be a requirement because Moderna has already got these huge um, contracts, financial contracts for developing bird flu jab. Um, the difference between the bird flu and what we went through in 2020, I think, is we're going to see a much higher mortality rate with whatever this new thing is that they've created, and the mortality rate will go way up, and people will be less reluctant to not take it. It'll be different in the sense that we're actually going to start seeing people die versus being told they're going to die and then not seeing anybody die of anything other than natural causes and stuff. Yeah. Pamela asked, "Hey Pamela, let's see, where did it go? Question. What are your thoughts on Netanyahu closing down his war cabinet?" Um, I don't know. I don't know. I think if they feel like they're close to achieving their objective of completely destroying or demolishing Hamas, they may be scaling back some stuff, but they also may. I don't know how feasible that really is in light of what's going on with Hezbollah in the north, because that looks like that's just going to continue to get larger and larger, and it's going to require another war cabinet. So I don't know. Maybe it's going to just be restructured. Gwenstone question: did Saudi Arabia really refuse American-backed currency and join BRICS? How much faster will it cause the digital currency to come into effect? If so, yes, I believe yes on both points. Yes, they're in BRICS, and yes, I think they are not exclusively using the U.S. dollar anymore to sell petroleum. Um, the U.S. is still going in there hat in hand, trying to work through some kind of normalization deals with Israel. I think in order to give them some leverage with Gaza, but I think we've lost all of our credibility with the Saudis in terms of negotiating power. So I don't. I think this will expedite. This will just be one more thing that will help expedite the central bank digital currency. But I think ultimately the CBDC will come out at the crash of our current fiat currency system, and I think that that will expedite the CBDC more than anything, and that will also kind of coincide with. Let's say that. Let's just play this out as a scenario. Let's say next October, bird flu comes out, right, and it's this devastating thing. Let's say September, and the government mandates everybody shuts down, schools shut down, businesses, etc. So we go back to the way it was a few years ago. This is a scenario. Scenario. It's not this. Well, if that's the case, if people can't work, instead of getting the stimulus checks like we got in the past, we may get this new form of a CBDC that rolls out, and basically it will become. It's like the genesis for the universal basic income. That will become kind of the standard. You will just start getting paid every month, regardless of whether you work or not. And it seems weird to think about it that way, but think about what we're in that right now. I mean, we're a nation that's 35 trillion in debt. We have borrowed so much from Titus's generation and from his everybody in his age group. They will never have things like Social Security. They won't have that same structure that we have. It will be completely different for them. Let's say the Lord doesn't come back tomorrow or next week or next year. Let's say the Lord doesn't come back till 2070. And I'm not saying that he will. I'm just saying that let's just play this out as a scenario. His America is going to look way different than what we have today. 46 years old. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like his America is going to very much look like Rome after the Caesars have taken over. You know, it's not going to be a republic anymore. Um, so with that said, they're going to have to do something in light of the fact that the present debt-backed fiat currency, this legacy system from the 20th century, is done. It's kaput, as the Germans would say. It's not even functional anymore. It'd be like me trying to go out and use Civil War dollars today and buy stuff. I mean, it's not going to work. So something will have to give, and I think that this crisis that's coming up, and they may save it right before the election like they did last time, but they'll something will trigger this, and that will be the CBDC is already gonna be in place. I think it's already pretty much done. They'd already done the bank test and all that kinda stuff on it, so right now, they're just kinda waiting. They're waiting for the right time to implement this new solution to the problem. Ready Player One type world, yep. Let's see, where are we? David Jack, has Israel used the laser beam technology yet? And if not, how close are they? I think they used it when Iran was launching all their stuff at them. It's already been used. I know that for a fact. Um, has Israel used the? Okay, that's the same question. Uh, how many? Allison asks, how many tunnels do we have in the U.S. and what goes on there? Ooh, a lot. We have a lot of tunnels in America, and we have what they call DUMBs, deep underground military bunker systems, and I believe a lot of these bunker systems are connected to each other. Mount Weather in Virginia. There's places in Kansas, Nebraska, where the ground is more pliable and used can be used a lot of places. Arkansas, Colorado. There's a lot of places that have these underground systems. So I don't know how many we have, but I believe they're connected, or a lot of them are connected. And should things go sideways for the world, and it's not just the government doing it. All these billionaires and um, um, Mark Zuckerberg and all these guys that have that kind of money are building underground bunker systems under their locations. So yeah, there's a lot under the United States right now. Pastor Gary asked, do you think things will heat up with so many countries rejecting the petrodollar? I do, and it's funny to think about it this way, but after World War II, the United States had basically walked away from that as the absolute victor, and not only that, but we had almost all of our infrastructure still intact, whereas Europe was just in ruin, right? And a lot of China was in ruin, and Japan was in ruins. The Philippines, a lot of places in the Philippines were in ruins. I mean, there's so much of the world was destroyed because of that conflict, but the United States was because we have these two giant oceans as barriers protecting us. Um, and so we set in place a number of different things that would give us the strategic advantage going forward. And, not that I love Franklin D. Roosevelt or even Truman or any of the people in their, in their cabinets and whatnot. I do believe that they had a better handle on history than our modern day politicians, and they understood that when power empires rise, they also go down, they also collapse. So they were doing a lot of these things preemptively to set themselves up and to set up their children and their grandchildren as far into the future as they could. And they did things like the Marshall Plan to help rebuild Europe, which would give America great leverage over the Europeans. Obviously, the Manhattan Project gave us military uh, leverage over the world until the Russians were able to get their hands on it. The Japanese reconstruction projects, rebuilding Japan after the destruction we caused there, also would give us leverage there in Japan. Bretton Woods Agreement would give us financial leverage over the world by making the U.S. the global reserve currency, and NATO would give us leverage. We did all these things right, and we set it up in the mid 1940s and late 1940s, and then we enjoyed the fruits of our labor for the next 20 years or so until that wasn't no longer viable, at least the financial side of Bretton Woods, and because we had a president that got us involved in a very costly and expensive land war in Asia, near Vietnam. And then at the same time, LBJ began to do this very expansive domestic program, creating basically the welfare state in America, that was incredibly costly and expensive. So the gold standard would no longer support those two expenditures. So we had to go to a debt-based currency. And then by the time Nixon came on, he had to take us off the gold standard. He didn't have a choice. So he worked out a deal with OPEC and said, "Hey, we'll get your back militarily if you make all your sales in U.S. currency." So that was the kind of the way things worked. And then we had a free floating debt-based current fiat currency that at all times we always carried some level of debt, right? But because of how stable the United States was politically and as a society, it was a safe bet to be able to keep dollars in reserve because they would keep their value. But think about how far we've come since then. And as the political party, since we're basically in this binary system of Republican and Democrat, and the culture itself keeps continuing to move further and further away from God, one party continues, at least in theory, in name, to kind of hold to those ideals, and the other one just says, threw it out the window, said, "Nope, we're going to reject everything that has to do with God, and we're going to go the opposite direction." And now these parties, where there was minor differences over the groups, begin to drift further and further and further apart. So each 4 to 8 years, there is a new power that completely reverses what the previous administration did in a lot of ways. And it just keeps becoming more and more extreme. And that's what the worry is from the Europeans about Trump and other global leaders around the world that aren't like populist or nationalist in their background. They're worried about Trump because he is threatening to undo so much of the work that had been done by the Obama administration and now the Biden administration. So um, it's kind of dealing with, imagine if you had to do business with somebody that was schizophrenic, and you didn't have to see him every day, but every once in a while you had to go see him, and you show up and you're not sure which, are you talking to Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde? You're not sure which which person you're going to be dealing with that day, and so it's hard to maintain a relationship like that, and America has become incredibly schizophrenic in that regard. Debbie Mason says, "Curious to know how these 10 nations will form and which ones will they be?" Well, I think I know in the 90s, right? If you look back in prophecy studies from the 90s and earlier, the idea was that Europe was going to be these 10 nations, and there would be 10 nations inside of Europe. And obviously, as time has gone on and we keep having these treaties, and more nations are included in the European Union. I think they're up to like 27 or so, 29 now. Um, I feel like there's that model doesn't work anymore. I do feel like the U.S. in the army, we had commands around the world. So the world was divided up into 7 commands. So you had America was Northcom, then you had Southcom for South America. Europe was EUCOM, Africa was AFRICOM, Middle East was CENTCOM, and then you had the Pacific PACOM. And I think the Club of Rome had 10 groupings of nations. And I think that this is going to go into regions. So basically, like North America would be one region, and South America would be like one region. And so it'll go regionally, and then out of these regions, there will be an elected body of whoever, regional viceroys or commanders or whatever they're going to be called. And then out of that group, you'll have one person that leads them. And so it may end up being like 10 of these leaders that come together, even if it's just 7 regions. So in my book, Hobo, Volume 2, the way I divided the world up was North America, because it was so big, would have 2 centers of power. One was like up in Maine, and the other was in like I don't know, I can't remember where now, but like Portland, Oregon, or something, or even in Canada. I don't know what's the Canadian city right above Washington State there, Vancouver, I think it is. So you could have Vancouver as one capital on one side of America, and then you could have like a place in Maine on the other side because DC will have been destroyed by this point. So then these serve as regional control hubs for those areas, but they all belong to this kind of this global regional system that may end up being like 10 regions. So whatever it looks like, I think it's going to be regional in nature, but a regional in makeup and then imperial in nature in the political nature of it will, and that's where the Antichrist will rise up. Yeah. Yeah, Cindy, I'm getting on Hobo. Again, I'm going to take volume 1 and 2 and put those together, and that'll be one book, and then I'll work on 3 and 4 together. Um, Debbie or Only Jesus Saves. Question: during the beast system, will it be Roman or Babylonian or a combo of both? Well, again, what Tyler was mentioning about the statue being all Babylonian in nature. If you think about the two big, I don't want to say entities, but the two big worldviews in Scripture, you have the worldly view that is always kind of encapsulated in this Babylonian system nature, right? And that's very worldly, secularly, Luciferian, pagan, whatever you want to call it, is anti-God, anti-Christ. And then you have the godly system that began, in Adam and all the way up through the where the church is today. There's always a separate people. So it'll be Roman in the sense that it will be maybe a reconstituted Rome 2.0 or a new Rome, whatever they want to call it, when they market it or brand it as. But the nature of it will be Babylonian. It'll be anti-God, anti-Christ. Okay. But let me touch on this one last thing with Pastor Gary's question. He said, "Do you think things will heat up?" Yes, I think when we have this change, anytime there's this big transition away from the way things used to be to the way things are going to be, there's always conflict and there's always going to be a lot of turmoil until that change is solidified. And so I think very much things are going to continue to heat up and become destabilized because I think people can sense at a very base level that things are starting to fall apart and things are becoming lawless and the system is broken. And I think that was only going to be that feeling of it is only going to be expedited as we continue on, especially going into this election season. But you know what I mean. If you've ever worked at a place, a business, maybe where things ran on clockwork, and you had a boss that cared, and you got paid on time, and things worked as they should. But then years later or something, let's say that the business is running out of money. The workers don't really know, but they sense something is wrong. There's something wrong with the business because now the managers don't care as much and they're late and there's a quality control goes down and there's just a general decline in everything. And I think people can sense that. And that's where that sense of things are beginning to fall apart feels like. And I think that's where we are today. Mhm. Okay. Um, Question, is Titus going to be your permanent sidekick? If he had his druthers, yes, he would be my permanent sidekick. What's up, Chooch? Um, but yeah, so definitely Titus he would be in here all the time if he could. Janice Clark, question: what do people mean when they say Christ is coming for a bride without spot or wrinkle? Now that is going back to what um, Paul spoke of, as he was going to present us as this chaste virgin to Christ. And his intent was that that the church would be spotless and blameless in that regard. Now, in reality, when you become a believer, like we're all sinners, we're all none of us are righteous in and of ourselves. We're not morally superior to anybody because we're saved. What Christ did for us and on the cross and dying for us changed our nature and made us acceptable to God. Because now it's not that God sees me and looks at me and think, "Oh wow, Pete's doing all this good stuff for me. I'm gonna let him in." Like this idea of Saint Peter at the gates, and he's kind of weighing your good and your bad. No, I'm made acceptable to God the Father because I'm covered in the blood of His Son because I've accepted that as payment for my sin, and I realize that I can't pay for my own sins, and so that is on the spiritual level. That's where we are. But the intent for Paul to write the things that he wrote in his epistles and his 7 epistles, and then to the churches, and then the other 3 that were personal letters or pastoral letters, was that we should be good people. We should be doing the good thing, moral thing, because um, that is how we kind of stand apart from those in the world. We don't worry about, we don't sorrow like those who don't have any hope, right? We know where we're going. Uh, we don't take our brother and sisters to court publicly and make this big spectacle as fellow believers. We should handle this internally if possible. Within the church, all manner of being married to one wife, not committing adultery, not doing all of these things that the world says is acceptable. And I think that was also kind of the intent of that, is that for us to be not only saved, eternally changed by being reborn, but also that we're going to be doing the right things and living for Christ in that way when He returns. Let's see. Sir Pierce Saville, could the miry clay that don't mix be the Catholic Islam? I don't think it is. I personally, that's just my opinion. I tend to think that this miry clay is going to be this mixing of technology into the humans in some form or fashion. And like I said, I think by the end of the Gog Magog conflict, I think militant Islam is done. There'll be Muslims after that. It won't be anything like it is today. They'll be as passive as Buddhists are today, or Hindus, or not to say that they don't ever do violent things, but it's not going to be anything like today. I think all of the steam will have been taken out of Islam, all the fight. So I think it's going to be technology mixing into the human body, and it just seems like the most logical way forward going through this. Tego Arcana Day, if I said that right. Pete, the rapture, are we talking about the months or years away? I'm more inclined for the latter. Things, in my view, will get a lot worse gradually. The normalization of evil before we are taken out. You know, Obviously, I don't know. I don't know if it could happen today. I have no idea. Um, I tend to think that, again, Tyler and I did the video, the Final Four. I think it's in this window of time between 2023 and 2026. When in that time period, I have no idea. Um, it would be ironic in a way if Trump won and we were taken out during the Trump administration, the last Trump. I don't know. It's kind of funny to me, but um, I don't I don't think it could be a year or 2, but I don't think it's gonna be, like, more than that necessarily. Just my opinion. I think the way things are going and the things that I mentioned earlier, not just this article, but previous articles, we've crossed so many points of no return at this point that I just don't know how much longer things will continue on. It's not gonna be business as usual. Like, let's say Trump won, it's not gonna go back to normal at that point. Things are gonna continue to be as fractious and divided and volatile as it was before, maybe even more. But it just seems like too many things are converging at so many different levels, at the geopolitical level, economic level, at the military level, at the technology level, at the cultural level, at the religious level, at the biblical level, all the prophecies that were foretelling about things that were going to happen and would be the conditions of the day. I mean, we're there. You know, it's not like in the 1990s. I use this example a lot where we had to. There was a lot more unknowns than there were knowns. I mean, we know so much more now than they did then about the way things would shape out prophetically. Um, and that's not even that many decades ago. That was what 3 decades ago. And here we are, in the mid 2020s, and it just seems we don't know the day or the hour, but we would know the season, and it seems like we're right in the midst of that season right now. So that's just my honest opinion. I don't know the date. I don't even pretend to know the date. I look at this window of time, and I think this makes the most sense to me. And I've had this window for a very long time, even when it wasn't popular. Hopefully that answers your question. But Nancy, question: do you think the Russia is posturing with the intent of going hot on the war? Do you think I imagine Putin would mass any type of weaponry like this and spend that kind of money not to go forward with it? I think honestly, Russia did what they did at the beginning with Ukraine, even if we were to go back to 2014, because of the continued aggression by the West against Russia. And what I mean by that is right after the Soviet Union collapsed in December of 91 and early 1992, NATO should have disbanded at that point because what was NATO's purpose? NATO's purpose was to prevent the expansion of Soviet influence throughout Europe. And after they, created the Iron Curtain and all that kind of stuff, um, NATO existed kind of solely for that one reason. But then when the Soviet Union collapsed and everything began to fall apart for them, and the Iron Curtain came down, all that kind of stuff, NATO no longer served a purpose, or shouldn't have, according to their like charter. What should have happened, in my opinion, was that NATO should have been converted over into some kind of European defense force that wasn't specifically targeting Russia, but now was just their own military that they could use as they saw fit as a, you know, supercontinent, whatever they are. So my opinion was that because NATO would not go away and NATO continued to expand even after US agreed not to expand it, it began to take in more and more countries. And then we kept influencing and getting involved in places like Ukraine by people like Victoria Nuland, who was helping fund and run these color revolutions to overthrow pro-Soviet or pro-Russian leaders and bring in pro-Western leaders. Not that not and I'm not saying that either was good. I'm saying that the fact that we're over there messing around in their election systems to begin with and fomenting revolutions would be akin to the Russians moving into China or to Mexico or Canada and doing the same things there. It would make us nervous, you know, and not trust the other side very well if they were doing that to us. And to be fair, China is heavily influencing and funding the cartels in Mexico. So I mean, there's definitely some animosity there, but or reciprocation there. But um, that's where all this really stems from. Aside from the fact that Ukraine belonged to Russia for a long time and was part of the Soviet Union and all that. I mean, there's a lot of history that predates even the United States. Um, and they think of that's the way Russians think in terms of like, we had this country for 500 years. They're part of Russia. They're our cousins. Um, and the U.S. was doing things in Ukraine that they shouldn't have been doing. Um, we certainly were funneling money and different things going on there. I don't want to get too specific on that, but we certainly had our we're not clean in all this, but we provoked Russia into basically military conflict into Ukraine. And I got to think that at some level that Putin was thinking, okay, well, this we'll go in, we'll put everybody at the border, we'll go in, we'll take back the Lubansk region, the border between Russia and Ukraine, that area that is largely Russian ethnic, heavily ethnically Russian, and reclaim those, repatriate those, and that would be kind of the end of it. Along with they have Crimea already since 2014, so they have that, and then they have the Lubansk region, and that would be that. But we kept antagonizing it. We kept funding um, Zelensky, and we kept giving him army or military weapons and funding and tanks and this and that, and it just kept dragging out and became more and more um, uh, complicated. And in a sense, we're trying to create a new Vietnam for Russia or a new Afghanistan for Russia to get bogged down in this thing. Um, and even when peace was brought up, there's peace agreements that the British were gonna. I think their old Prime Minister Boris, the guy with the crazy hair, the blonde crazy hair, Boris something Johnson. Um, I think he was heading over there with a peace agreement a year or two ago, and then that got derailed by the United States. Um, I think we've crossed this point of no return now that Russia is going to go full. They're going to keep marching through, and Russia has largely been holding back. They've not been throwing their full weight at this, and it's disingenuous for media outlets that are pro Ukraine. And I'm not anti Ukraine. I'm not pro Russian. I'm not anti-Russian, pro like I'm neutral in this. I'm just looking at this from an outside observer. But I think that the fact that we kept throwing money and stuff, we're throwing fuel on the fire. We just keep fanning this fire. It's just going to get bigger, and pretty soon it's going to get out of control. And I mentioned this months ago. At some point there's going to be some red line that Putin has that somebody's going to cross, and then that's going to be the trigger for him. And it's just going to be okay. We're steamrolling this place, and we're going all the way to the border of Poland, and maybe even further. They may. I mean, I could see them taking Moldova, but it's. I think the Russians miscalculated to what extent we would drive this thing, um, and now I feel like too many bridges have been burnt, and there's no way to undo the any hope of a peace settlement now with the destruction of the pipeline, the Russian gas pipeline, the Gazprom, and then the destruction of the bridge and the attacks in Moscow, the terrorist attacks that the U.S. has some kind of fingerprints on. I mean, there's a lot of things that have happened that I feel like there's no turning back from it really. So it's just going to continue on. So yeah, I think it's going to keep going, and they're not going to be satisfied until Kiev is overrun. And the next thing they got to take is Odessa, and then Kiev, and then um, beyond that, there's really nothing left. Blake G, question. Can you please explain what you were talking about earlier when you said that in Daniel's dream, the whole statue represented Babylon? Prayers still going up for your daughter. Thanks, by the way. Oh, okay. So, um, I didn't see it this way until I was listening to Tyler, and you'll have to apologize. I'll link that video to this afterwards in the show notes, but the whole system is Babylonian, and that they're going through different stages. So you have the head is Babylon, the neck and shoulders is Persia, then the abdomen is Greece, and then the legs of iron are Rome, Eastern, Western, and then you get down to like the ankles. There's a transition between the ankles and the toes, and that was Mystery Babylon. And mystery in the sense that nobody saw the United States coming. First of all, the Americas, North, Central, and South America, for most of history, have been largely uninhabited. There were Indians here, Native Americans that came over. There were probably peoples that lived here prior to them that have long since died away before the Indians came. And when I say the Indians, I mean all of the North American Indian tribes, the nations, all of the like the Aztecs and the Mayans and then the Incans and all those folks. Um, but the Vikings had come over, like the 10th century. The Chinese had, I think, had come over. Possibly even other cultures had come over and just found this place, but nobody settled here in a large degree. And so the Vikings, put it this way, the Vikings came over in like the 10th century and they got their butts whooped by the Native Americans that were here then. The tribes just crushed them, and they left. They didn't settle here. But then 5 centuries later, the Pilgrims come over and they settle, and nothing happens. Like there or something happened in those 5 centuries. I mean, part of it was the Black Plague or the bubonic plague that wiped out huge portions of the populations here. Um, Infighting between the nations themselves, the Indians nations fighting each other, killing each other, enslaving each other. There was a great winnowing of the population here during that 500 years. And then you have the Spanish that came over, basically decimated the Aztec culture, and then so on and so forth. So my point is that um, there was there was people here, but there was no civilizations, and there was certainly not any kind of Mormon. I don't even know what they call them. The Lamechhians. I don't know, whatever the Mormon theology has, like these two great civilization of like white people and like dark skinned people, and the whole all that. But that none of that's true, and none of that is borne out historically anyway or archaeologically. But point is that this place remained hidden for a long time, and it wasn't until just the right time, 1492, when Columbus and the three ships come over and they discover, instead of the East Indies, they discover the West Indies, and the rest is history, right? I mean, there began the colonization effort of the United States. So we were a mystery in terms of even our existence as a continent, then let alone what America would become later on. So that is a mystery form of Babylon. And I don't think we started out that way, but I think we've certainly become that way since then. Now, this is none of this is a mystery to God. God saw all this from the beginning of before the creation of the world. So I'll link that. I think Tyler does a much better job explaining all that. And the only questions I had to him that he answered, when I said, well, if that's true in America's mystery Babylon, why are we being talked about in Revelation 16 and 17, or Revelation 17 and 18, rather than, Revelation 6? And the way he explained to me was like, that's just most of Revelation has what you call this chronological out or linear chronological kind of outcropping of like the things in chapter 6 happen, and that's followed by the things in chapter 7, chapter 8. But there are also these um, parenthetical insertions where there's an expansion on something, and that's not placed in any particular time necessarily. It's just an expansion on, like Revelation 13, the rise of this beast system. I think coincides with Revelation 6, verse 1 and 2, with the going forth of the white horse to conquer and to conquer, conquering and to conquer, right? And that's just a huge blow up of that whole thing of what that beast system looks like. So there's those things intermingled in there as well. And the way he put it was that Revelation 17 and 18 were um, kind of like summarizing a sermon. That you talked about everything, and at the very end, you bring back up everything as a summary. And so I don't know. It kind of makes sense to me that way, but I'll link those videos. I don't not doing any justice to Tyler's videos, so I'll link that. Yeah, Jimmy Root. Thank you, Mila. Okay, Jerry Cochran. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the scene calendar, the seventh millennium starts March 2076. This would mean the tribulation starts in 2069. So, how big is the rapture tribulation gap? Well, I don't, no disrespect to Ken Johnson. I hold him in very high regards. I just don't know how much stock I put into the Essene calendar in terms of how that really plays out. I think the if that had been the mechanism by which God would use, for everything, I think that would be the system that we're under, but we're not. We're not under that system. We haven't been under that system in 2000 years. So, I look at the biblical timelines in a very general sense. And roughly, we know that from Adam to Abraham was roughly 2000 years. I don't know exactly when Abraham was born. I don't prescribed. I'm not going to try and say that he was born on 1948 Anno Mundi or anything like that. I'm just saying that it's roughly from Adam to Abraham 2000 years. From Abraham to Jesus, roughly 2000 years. And from Jesus' first coming to where we are today is almost 2000 years. So it makes sense to me that we're coming up on the 6,000th year. Now, if you want to get into the weeds and all that stuff, there's certainly guys out there that's all they talk about. Randy Nettles on my website is steeped in that kind of stuff. TW Tram. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are incredibly knowledgeable about the calendars and the lunar cycles and the jubilees and all that kind of stuff. I get lost in the sauce on that stuff. But if that's what you like and that's what you're interested in discovering, then I would recommend those folks. I'm just looking at it in a very broad sense, and there's no arguments in my view. Nobody argues over the fact that from Adam to Abraham was 2,000 years, roughly, right? There's no disagreements there. Nobody disagrees that from Abraham to Jesus is about 2,000 years, and likewise from Jesus to first coming to his second coming, we're right there. So I don't. You can get all into the weeds on a lot of these calendar mysteries, whether it's the Essenes, whether it's this theory that we've lost 3 centuries in the Dark Ages. Um, Charlemagne or whatever the Pope was then changed it so that he would be in charge right at this particular year, so they had to cut some years out or whatever. Basically went from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar where we are today, and it's largely held true for pretty much everywhere. Now the Muslims, Chinese, I think have their own calendar systems, but in terms of just the general world, you know, there's no general disagreement that we're in the year to what year are we? 2024. So fascinating. With the Essenes and all that kind of stuff, I just don't know how much. I'm not going to put any stock into that in terms of like um, applying that to today. But again, I love Ken. He's a great Christian, great brother in Christ. He's incredibly smart, and I've got a lot of his books on the early church fathers and stuff. So I don't know. I don't get too wrapped up in the Essenes. And I think if God had wanted the Essenes to play a more prominent role, he would have. But as far as the gap goes, I don't know. I used to think it was going to be at least 10 years, but um, the further we've gone along, the less time I think is required for a gap. I don't know that we need 10 years anymore. I think we're basically there. Maybe a year at the most. After the rapture, there may be like up to about a year to where the chaos gets kind of handled and a new system rises up that takes control. So could be 2 years. I don't know. There it is. After 2 days, he will revive us, and the third day he will raise us up and shall live in his sight. I think we're right there in between the second and the third day. Keegan Merritt. What I find interesting is that Ezekiel 38 talks about how God puts hooks in the jaw of Russia, turns them around, and draws them down. Where is God turning them around from? Ukraine? Yeah. I think what is it's going to be one of two things in Ukraine with Russia. I'm starting to lose my voice. Either Russia is humiliated in Ukraine by some kind of Western alliance, NATO, Ukraine. Yeah. We stand up to them, defeat them, and they just kind of slink back with their heads between their legs, or tails between their legs, kind of beaten. And then they, in that frustration, they head south to Israel, where they already have a lot of assets there invested in places like Syria and Lebanon. Um, that's one possible scenario. The other one is they're victorious in Ukraine, and in that pride, and that we don't not only beat Ukraine, but we beat NATO by doing this. There's that hubris and that pride that swells them up, and they begin to think, well, what else do we need to do? We need this is our time. We're going to take advantage of this. Let's go do what we got to do. We're victorious here against all of these odds. Now let's head down here to, you know, take care of the southern flank, if you will. And Russia right now is all over Africa. Russia, via the Wagner group, is like their professional mercenary group that works for them, are all over Africa, gobbling up assets in places, basically like the mafia right now. Um, not just in there, but all over the place. So um, I think the more that the U.S. shrinks back, and even if Trump is elected, I could see him getting us out of a lot of these entanglements that had been, bogging us down for a long time. And as we pull out, Russia could, insert itself into those places, covertly, obviously, but so it's either one of those two scenarios where Russia either is humiliated in Ukraine and they take out their frustration on Israel that way, and there's precedents for that. If you think back to Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was the one of the descendants of the four generals that worked for Alexander the Great. And when Alexander died, his kingdom was divided up amongst these four generals, where Antiochus was one of the offspring of one of those generals. And he's moving into Egypt to conquer Egypt from Syria. And this was right around the time the Romans started to become a real presence, military presence, beyond what they had been already with the Carthaginians, etc., and the Punic Wars. But Epiphanes is basically, if I remember the story correctly, he's on the beach there near the Nile on the Delta somewhere, and the Romans basically draw a circle around him in the sand. The Roman legion shows up, says, "If you take any step at this direction, we're going to destroy you and destroy your kingdom. The only direction you can go is the back the way you came." And he went back into Israel then, and then that's when he began to really dislike, become this tyrannical despot in Israel during this time, which you know boys couldn't be circumcised. They couldn't practice Judaism anymore. He desecrated the second temple with the pig's blood and an altar to Zeus and the Holy of Holies, and that's what triggered the Maccabean revolt. And anyways, so there's precedence for that, to see that a humiliated leader takes out his frustrations on Israel this way. But I'm thinking, because of the size of this coalition that the Gog Magog is able to put together, it's coming on the heels of victory. Nobody wants to follow a loser. If the Russians get humiliated in Ukraine, I don't see a lot of people lining up behind them to follow them. But if they're victorious and not only defeating the Ukrainians, but defeating NATO and the West, I mean, that would be a huge point of contention, of pride there for them to hang their hats on. So I kind of think they'll be victorious in Ukraine, and out of that, that's where they're going to swing south. And they may not even come all the way south. They may go down, do some stuff, and then head back, and that's when that hook in the jaw draws them back down into it. Somebody gets assassinated, or something happens, and they cannot let that thing go, and that's what triggers this whole thing. So hopefully, Keegan, that answers your question. And I think, oh, here's another one. Allison, Pete, how did God seal up the words of prophecy that he said would be revealed in the last days? That's a good question. I've always held to this idea of this two types of information flow, um, from God to humanity. The first one you have is called progressive revelation, and this is where God speaks, and he said, and he's talking directly to somebody like Adam, or he's talking to Noah, or he's talking to Abraham, etc. We have those recorded in Scripture for us. The other one is where God is speaking through a person like Moses, or speaking through a prophet like Isaiah or Jeremiah or somebody. So that's, thus saith the Lord, X, Y, and Z is going to happen, or this is going to be this, and that's going to be that. And that's how we get the bulk of the Bible. In fact, what we have, what we call canon, is called progressive revelation. And even in the Gospels, where you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John writing down things by the power of the Holy Spirit, are able to recall the things that would make that story unique to Matthew, or unique to John, or unique to Mark, etc., or to the Pauline epistles and James and Jude, and the rest. But there's also, and, well, let me make an exception to that. Progressive revelation is in the case of the book of Revelation with John, but with the difference with John is, he's told just to write what he sees and hears. He's not. This is not any. I think there's a little bit at the beginning. I, John, was your brother, and I'm on the island of Patmos. He's kind of describing where he is at that point, but the rest of it is God's telling him specifically what to write. He's not getting any leeway in this. He's just copying, and told to write what he sees, and write what he hears, and so he's doing that way. Hmm. The second kind is called progressive illumination, and this is where, after everything is written, the canon of Scripture is closed. Now things, as time goes on and the right time approaches, things are beginning to become clear, because the political winds are changing, the geopolitical winds are changing, prophetic winds are blowing, etc. Like from the 1890s, Theodore Herzl, I think it was 1897, had the first Zionist Congress in Europe. And from that moment, if you were a student of Bible prophecy, and you were looking, and you were able to see and hear of these things happening, if you're a student of Bible prophecy in 1897, and you see in the newspaper, Theodore Herzl conducts first Zionist Congress, the goal is to go back to their ancient homeland, Palestine, or whatever they called it at the time. Alarm bells should be ringing, like, ooh, that's interesting. Like, that's something you would keep your finger on to see where that goes. And then a couple years later, you would see World War One start, and the Ottoman Empire, who controls, at that time they called it Palestine, controls Palestine, are part of this, the Central Powers, and they're getting this. And then at the end of that conflict, even before it's over, they're going to lose. Balfour Declaration comes out. So if you're that same guy watching, and seeing all these kind of things starting to happen, you're starting to see with your biblical lens, like, hey, this thing is starting to come about. Like Israel, we don't know how it's going to happen, but Israel looks like they're moving in the direction of becoming their own nation again. And then obviously World War II happens, the Holocaust becomes internationally known about, and from that you see the legitimacy of why Israel has to become a nation. And then that manifests in November of 1947 with, UN resolution. I can't remember what the exact number is for the UN resolution for that, but 242 or something, whatever the number is. Then you see, boom, they have the authority to become their own nation, and just a few months later, it happens, right? That is that progressive illumination where you're starting to see the reality catch up with Bible prophecy. And I think for how things are sealed up is that from the time that a prophecy is spoken until its fulfillment, in a lot of cases, it seems so antithetical to our understanding of human nature, of the world, of it doesn't make any sense. But then it happens exactly like how God said it was going to happen, and then you can see it, boom, boom, there it is. It's fulfilled. You can't deny that it is. And so I think that sealing is in a lot of ways is that we just can't wrap our minds around how God is going to do something. How is God going to have these locusts come out of this abyss and they look like, half women, half lion, half whatever, but they're locusts and they sting with their tails and you're in pain, incredible pain for um, 5 months, but you can't die. Like we don't understand how that's going to play out. We just know it's going to happen that way. Or we know it's going to happen. We don't know exactly how that's going to happen. And so when I teach through Revelation, I'm very upfront with telling people like, look, there's a lot of things I don't know how this is going to play out. I can't even rationalize it in my mind. Locusts from the abyss, or these 200 million horsemen that have smoke coming out of their mouths and their tails, and like I some of this stuff is fantastical, but I just have faith that that's exactly how God said it, and that's how it's gonna happen. We don't know exactly what that's gonna look like or manifest like in reality, but it's gonna be something like that. So, anyways, that's kinda how I see things. I think things are sealed because of our understanding is not we can't we can't wrap our minds around certain things. Like, if you went back to the 1500s during the Reformation, the idea that Israel is gonna become a nation again seemed so. I mean, that's like us saying like, "Hey, what let's just say hypothetically, there was a prophecy that says when we colonize Mars, that's when the end will come." And if you're in the 1500s and you're thinking like, "Mars? Like, how we can't even fly. How are we gonna get like, that just doesn't there's no way to compute that except by magic." Maybe magic happens and, but this is so far afield from our understanding that I think that's how things get sealed. Like, and they get sealed, we don't understand them by any there's no way that they even remotely make sense. We set it over here on the shelf and it just collects dust, and then we forget about it. And I think that's how things stay sealed because we don't know what to do with it. But now we live in this day and age in this last century where we've basically gone from the first industrial revolution at the turn of the century of the 1900s to now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, uh, where now everything's cyber physical and quantum computing is a reality, artificial intelligence is a reality. We can genetically create a superhuman, a super soldier. We can put machines on Mars. We can put machines on the moon. We can manipulate matter. We can print things at the molecular level. I mean, there's so many things we can do now that nothing seems out of the realm of possibility now. So yeah, that's kind of how my answer to that. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for getting all those questions. So, folks, I hope I try to do a decent job answering your questions. It's good to be back on with you. Um, Again, I don't. Some folks know everything that was going on in the past, but most of you don't, and I don't really think it's pertinent to the population at large. It wasn't anything, you know, scandalous or anything like that, but it's just personal family stuff. But for those of you who know, and things are definitely on the up and up for us. So um, continue to pray for Ella. She's doing great. She had a little knot on her head yesterday, like a bump, and we talked to the neuro team, and they said that they thought it was just she's out and about. We were maybe doing a little too much, so she needed to scale things back. Let's see. So, but yeah, so we're trying to just kind of take it easy, not push her too hard or do too much. I mean, we're constantly on the run every day, all day, every day. So for us just to kind of lay low and it's hard, especially with five kids that are going in every direction. My daughter Chloe had a dance recital, so that was a big event. Yeah. So this is Ella. Everybody wanted to see you and say hi. You say hi. Hi. Thank you. Thank you guys for all the cards and gifts. Yeah, it's and the prayers. Very much overwhelming. Little buff gone away. Mhm. Yeah. So she's got to keep this on for how many more weeks? Two more weeks, and then she can take this off her brace. And I bet she is going to be super excited at that. So, anyways, that's it for today. Thank you guys for hanging out. Um, had about 600 plus for the last 2 hours, so pretty good turnout for a Monday afternoon. And okay, see you. Bye. Thank you. So that is her, and she's doing much better. Again, a testimony to our testament to prayer, guys. We were blown away by the amount of prayers and well wishing and support for her. Um, Overwhelming in a good way. It's overwhelming, but thank you, thank you, thank you for everybody out there who's prayed, who's sent cards and things. It is humbling and just over. We're still getting mail every day. We're getting these boxes and boxes of cards and things. So the post office now, I just walk in and they take me into the back and they've got everything separated already for me and bundled up, ready to go, and they help me carry it out to the car, and it's pretty cool. The churches here have been amazing. Our church has been, the youth pastor was there that night with us in the wait while we're waiting outside for surgery, and the elders have come by. Um, each of the nights we're in the hospital. Family, uh, amazing family. They've done this like meal train for us. Uh, it's just I don't even know how to. I can't even like um, reconcile all these things in my head, how this has all turned out. Ultimately, we read all the cards and all the letters. There is no way. There's no way we're going to be able to respond to everybody. It's just too much. But just so you know that we did receive it, and we are very much thankful for that. And we're just now starting to get in the mail from like the UK. We got a couple in from, or got one in from Northern Ireland. Got one in from South America or South Australia, Adelaide, I believe. Got one in from South Africa, Germany. I want to say Romania or um, Croatia. I don't know, one of those places, but yeah, it's just crazy, crazy. So thank you guys for all that. And now I am getting ready to go take my other daughter to her orthodontist appointment. So she's texting me like, "Hey, are we going to this thing or not?" So thank you guys. Um, I will. I expect to be on maybe Friday. I don't know. I play it by ear, but definitely next Monday. I won't be able to go on at 12. I have a meeting for work at that time, so I may push that one to Tuesday. Um, but for sure, at least once a week from me. And I'll try and get the notices out in plenty of time for everybody to react to it. So thank you guys. God bless. And just if you have any things you want me to cover, topics, um, whatever it is you want me to go over, shoot me an email at the rev_310 at Yahoo. And somebody had asked me a question earlier on there about the geopoliticals. I have to go back and find that email. All this stuff has happened in between that receiving that email and just me now thinking about it. So I'll have to go back. But I think I responded to that person that I very much wanted to do that topic. So, but if there's something in particular you want me to cover, shoot me a message. It doesn't have to be Bible prophecy if it's in the wheelhouse that I'm comfortable dealing with. Like if you want me to write an article about the Essene calendar, I'm just going to hand that to Randy and say, "Here, you got this," because I don't know anything about this, or not. I'm not by any stretch an expert on that. But if it's something in my wheelhouse that you think I could talk on or teach on or whatever, then I absolutely will. So just thank you guys. Love you all. You guys have been a huge blessing in more ways than I can even share with you right now. So thank you, and we'll see you on next either Friday or probably next Tuesday or so. But definitely keep you guys posted. And don't forget to support the other ministries out there. Pastor Gary here at Victory Church. Check out his videos. Ty Green had a great video on the rapture. Um, Chooch's video last night was very good. You can watch Brother Chooch's, and then Tyler's videos. The last few that have been very good. But I'm going to link the one that he has with the Babylon on there with the pastor Jimmy Root, and then I'll also link the Final Four back on there as well. So that video, Final Four, is over 300,000 views, which is insane to me because like usually we don't get to that level of traffic. Mostly the traffic is under 100,000 views. Um, but to be over 300,000 views, that's crazy to me. And that's God moving that in the ways he wants to move it. And anyways, it's cool. It's cool to be a part of this little community, and thankful you guys are the kind of people that you are, and the caliber of people you are. Last thing, because I wrote this down earlier, and I want you guys to think about it, and maybe we'll talk about it next week. Let me see if I can find the question. Why is the blessed hope called the blessed hope? And I know you wanted to say, oh, it's because of this. I want you to think about why is it called the blessed hope? Think about blessed as a word and think about hope. What is hope? And think about what kind of people are we that need that blessed hope? What does that say about us? And what does that say about the time in which we live? Because I think it's fascinating. And anyways, I'm going to leave you with that question. You can chew on that at your own leisure. And remind me next week if I haven't addressed it before then, but definitely want to keep talking about this. So thank you guys, and God bless. I'll read through the chat later tonight when I get some downtime, and hope you all have a blessed day, and Maranatha.